Almost finished, it read. 20 years on this beauty. Can't wait to finally teach Carol to drive her right. Our retirement trip starts next summer. My hands trembled as I closed the journal. He never got that summer. A car engine sounded from the street. I turned just in time to see my son's black BMW pull into the driveway. Brian stepped out slowly, shoulders hunched, eyes avoiding mine. Even from a distance, I recognized that posture. Guilt had always made him smaller. His wife followed him out, flawless as ever, designer sunglasses, perfect hair. Confidence wrapped around her like perfume. Vanessa surveyed the scene like it belonged to her. Brian stopped a few feet away. "Mom," he said. I didn't answer. "Where's the car, Brian?" He swallowed. "I needed to talk to you about that." My voice came out steady. "Where is it?" "I sold it." The words didn't land all at once. They hovered, meaningless, until my mind finally caught up. "You sold your father's car?" He looked down. "Vanessa and I needed the money. She's been planning a trip. Paris. It's important for her work." The garage seemed to tilt. "That car wasn't yours. It was just sitting there," he said quickly. "You don't even drive it." Vanessa stepped forward, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "It's done, Carol," she said pleasantly. "We leave tomorrow." I stared at my son. The boy I raised. The man who couldn't look me in the eye. "You should have asked me," I said. Brian hesitated. "You would have said no." He wasn't wrong. They left soon after. The BMW disappeared down the street, taking something far more valuable than a car with it. I locked the garage and returned inside, Dennis's journal pressed against my chest. 8 months of grief hadn't prepared me for this. And I didn't yet know that one phone call the next morning would change everything. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. The man on the other end said, "Mrs. Bennet, I have your husband's car, and something he hid before he died." The phone rang exactly at 7. I had been awake for hours, sitting at the kitchen table with Dennis's journal open in front of me, rereading the same page until the words blurred. The one where he described rebuilding the engine, every measurement precise, every note careful. He always believed details mattered. Maybe that was why I answered the phone. "Hello, Mrs. Bennet." The man's voice sounded strained, as if he'd been carrying grief for too long. "My name is Tom Graves. I own Graves Classic Auto. I believe I have your husband's car." My hand tightened around the receiver. "The Shelby?" "Yes, Your son brought it in yesterday." The room seemed to narrow. "Why are you calling me?" There was a pause. "Because Dennis asked me to. And because there's something he wanted you to know." I was dressed and driving within 20 minutes. Graves Classic Auto sat at the edge of an industrial strip, clean and modern, its front lot lined with vintage cars gleaming in the early sunlight. Tom Graves waited outside, gray-haired, eyes red. When he shook my hand, his grip trembled. "Your husband saved my life," he said quietly. Inside his office, he told me the story Dennis never did. How years ago Tom had dreamed of opening this dealership, but couldn't get a loan. How Dennis, my careful, practical husband, had co-signed without telling anyone. How this entire business existed because my husband believed in a stranger. He talked about that car constantly, Tom said. Every show, every auction. He was proud of it. How much is it worth? I asked. Tom hesitated. About $180,000. I sat down hard. My son sold it for 15, I whispered. Tom nodded grimly. I paid him that. But I never intended to keep it. Dennis made me promise something 2 years ago. He led me into the showroom. The Shelby waited under a cover. When Tom pulled it back, my breath caught. Burgundy paint. Perfect chrome. Dennis's work, flawless and alive. I reached into the car and breathed in the familiar scent of oil and leather. There's something hidden, Tom said, stepping back. Dennis had me help him install it. He said it was for you alone. Behind the radio panel, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in Dennis's hand. Beneath it, a thick folder. The letter explained everything. Dennis had been investigating Vanessa for over a year. Different names. Different marriages. Same pattern. Target men with aging parents and family assets. Slowly convince them their parents were failing. Push them to sell homes. Then disappear. My hands shook as I read. She's planning to take the house, Dennis had written. Brian won't see it without proof. If you're reading this, please finish what I started. Photos spilled from the folder. Marriage certificates. Notes. Phone numbers. Dennis knew. He had died trying to protect us. I closed the folder, tears finally breaking free. Tom's voice was steady. You're not alone. And she won't get away with this. That afternoon, I dialed the first number in Dennis's notes. The man who answered said, I've been waiting for this call for years. The man on the other end of the line didn't ask who I was. He already knew. I wondered when you'd call, he said quietly. His voice was tired, worn thin by years of regret. My name is Stanley Wright. I sat in Tom's office, phone pressed to my ear, Dennis's folder open in front of me. You were married to Vanessa Cortland, I said. Yes, he answered. For 6 months. Long enough to destroy everything. Stanley told me his story slowly, carefully, as if saying it too fast might make it hurt. Again. He met Vanessa at a community fundraiser where his elderly mother volunteered. She was charming, attentive, endlessly patient. She made him feel seen at a time when loneliness had hollowed him out. She never rushed me, he said. That's how she got me to trust her. After the wedding, the concern started. Small comments at first. Your mom seems forgetful. She looked confused today. Are you sure she should still be living alone? Vanessa shared articles about dementia. About falls. About accidents. She left them where Stanley would notice. Slowly, carefully, she rewrote reality until normal aging looked like danger. She found a memory care facility, Stanley continued. The best one in the state. Said. It was the only safe option. The cost was impossible. So Vanessa suggested selling his mother's house. A house she'd lived in for 42 years. The money went into a joint account. 2 weeks later, Vanessa vanished. Every dollar gone. Phone disconnected. No address. No explanation. My mother died 6 months later, Stanley said, still asking when she could go home. I closed my eyes. Please, he added. If she's near your family, stop her. She doesn't change. She just changes names. After we hung up, I dialed the second number. George Murphy answered immediately. His story was different, but only in details. He met Vanessa at his father's funeral. She understood grief. She understood timing. 8 months later, they were married. 3 days after selling his father's auto shop, she disappeared with the money. That's her specialty, George said. She studies families before she enters them. By the time I set the phone down, my hands were numb. Dennis hadn't been paranoid. He had been precise. That evening, I reviewed everything I'd ever noticed about Vanessa. Comments about my memory. Questions about the house. Brian asking where I kept important documents. It had already started. Dennis had left me one more clue, a business card tucked into the folder. Peter Coleman, private investigator. I met him the next morning. Peter laid out the timeline calmly. She's in the setup phase. Paris builds the fantasy. When they return, she'll start suggesting you need help. Can we stop her? I asked. Only if your son sees it himself, Peter said. If you confront him without proof, she'll convince him you're confused. That night, Brian and Vanessa came to dinner. Vanessa smiled. Talked about Paris. About new beginnings. Then she said it. This house is too big for you alone, Carol. The first move. The next day, I asked my son to come over alone. He said no. And I knew I was running out of time. Brian finally agreed to come over the next afternoon. Alone. That alone told me everything. He didn't tell Vanessa where he was going, at least not the truth. When he stepped into the kitchen, his posture was stiff, guarded, like a man bracing for a storm he didn't believe in but feared anyway. Mom, he said carefully. If this is about the car. It's about your father, I interrupted. That stopped him. I didn't ask him to sit. I waited until he did it himself, lowering into the chair across from me, arms folded tight across his chest. Defense before accusation. I recognized it. Instantly. I slid Dennis's letter across the table. Read this first, I said. All of it. Brian frowned, then unfolded the page. As he read, the color drained from his face in stages. Anger came first, his jaw tightening, his breath sharpening. Then disbelief. Then something quieter and more dangerous, doubt. This doesn't make sense, he said. Dad never trusted Vanessa. He didn't trust what didn't add up, I replied. And he didn't want to hurt you without proof. I opened the folder. Photos. Marriage certificates. Names he'd never heard before. Vanessa, standing at 2 different weddings, 2 different men, 2 different years. Brian pushed back from the table. Anyone can fake documents. Then call them, I said, sliding the phone numbers toward him. Ask them what happened to their families. He stood abruptly. You're asking me to interrogate strangers based on Dad's suspicions. I'm asking you to finish what he started. Brian paced the kitchen, hands tangled in his hair. You don't understand. Vanessa saved me. She believes in me. I stood slowly. So did your father. The words hit harder than I expected. Brian grabbed the numbers, crushed them in his fist. I won't do this. He turned for the door. Brian, I said quietly, your father spent the last months of his life protecting you. He froze. He died before he could finish, I continued. I won't let his work die too. Brian left without another word. That night stretched endlessly. Every sound outside made my heart jump. I didn't know whether he'd confront Vanessa, or run straight back into her arms. The phone rang at midnight. Mom, Brian whispered. I called them. My knees weakened. They told me everything, he said. The houses. The money. The disappearances. I closed my eyes. And then I asked Vanessa questions, he continued. Simple ones. Her answers changed. Completely. What happened? She packed a bag. Called me weak. Said I was just like Dad. Silence. I think she's running, Brian said. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was the investigator. She just booked a one-way flight, he said. We have less than 2 hours. We met at the house just after 3 in the morning. Brian looked like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were red, his movements slow, as if his body was still catching up to what his mind had already accepted. Peter Coleman stood beside him, calm and precise, the way people get when chaos is no longer surprising. She's at the airport hotel, Peter said. Checked in under a different name. Multiple cash withdrawals. One-way ticket. Brian swallowed. So it's true. She was planning to disappear. She always was, Peter replied. Tonight just forced her hand. We drove in silence. The city was empty, streetlights stretching long shadows across the road. Brian sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his reflection faint and broken in the glass. I reached back and took his hand. He held on tightly, like a child, afraid to let go. The airport was already awake when we arrived. Fluorescent lights. Rolling suitcases. Half-asleep travelers clutching coffee cups and boarding passes. Vanessa blended in perfectly, until she didn't. She appeared near the security line, sunglasses on despite the early hour, too large. Suitcases at her side. Calm. Confident. Ready to vanish. The detectives moved quickly. We need to speak with you. Vanessa turned, smiling. Is there a problem? The badge flashed. Linda Marsh, you're under arrest. The smile cracked. She ran. Heels abandoned, luggage crashing to the floor, she sprinted across the terminal. Security tackled her before she reached the exit. She screamed, kicked, denied everything. When she saw Brian, her face twisted with fury. You ruined this, she spat. You were supposed to be smarter. I stepped in front of him. Police dragged her away, her voice echoing until it disappeared behind secured doors. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor called. She's taking a plea deal, he said. But there's one thing you need to hear. The prosecutor's voice was calm, almost routine, as if he were reading the weather. 12 years, he said. Federal time. Identity theft, fraud, forgery across multiple states. She won't be hurting anyone for a long while. I thanked him and hung up. Brian was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. When I told him, he nodded once, like someone acknowledging a fact rather than a victory. I should feel relieved, he said. But all I feel is tired. That's normal, I told him. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. The weeks that followed were quiet. Too quiet at times. Brian moved back into his old room, the one with fading posters and childhood trophies. Some days he talked. Some days he barely spoke at all. Twice a week, he went to therapy. I didn't push. I cooked his favorite meals, kept the lights on, let time do what it does best. One afternoon, I found him in the garage. He was sitting on Dennis's old work stool, holding the journal. Tears slipped down his face, silent and steady. I forgot how much he wrote about me, Brian said. About teaching me things. About being proud. You were his greatest project, I said. That was when I told him about the rest. The safe deposit box. The investment Dennis had made decades ago and forgotten. The money he'd left behind, not as wealth, but as protection. Enough for independence. Enough for choice. Brian stared at me. He planned for everything. Yes, I said softly. Even for after he was gone. A month later, a familiar engine sound rolled down the street. Low. Deep. Perfect. Brian and I stepped onto the porch together. The Shelby sat in the driveway, sunlight glinting off its restored curves. Tom Graves climbed out, keys in his hand, smiling. This was never mine, he said. It belongs where it was built. Brian couldn't speak. We opened the garage door together. The car slid back into its old place, oil stain. Waiting like it never gave up hope. The garage smelled right again. That Sunday morning, Brian and I opened the hood. Dennis's notes guided us, line by line. When the engine finally roared to life, I felt it in my chest. Later, I drove. Windows down. Brian laughing beside me. The road open. Dennis was everywhere. Some people leave behind money. Some leave behind memories. Dennis left behind protection. And because of that, his family survived. The first time I drove the Shelby alone, I cried. Not the kind of crying that breaks you open, but the quiet kind, the kind that comes when something heavy finally lifts. The engine's low rumble filled the cabin, steady and confident, just like Dennis had always been. I rested my hands on the steering wheel, where his had worn the leather smooth over decades. "I'm doing it," I whispered. "Just like you wanted." I didn't go far. Just around town. Past the hospital where I'd worked most of my life. Past the grocery store Dennis insisted on visiting every Saturday morning. Familiar roads. Familiar memories, but everything felt different now. When I pulled back into the driveway, Brian was waiting. He smiled, a real one this time. "I forgot how alive this car feels," he said. "That's because your father built it with patience," I replied. "Not speed." Life slowly found a new rhythm. Brian continued therapy. Some days were still heavy, but the sharp edges of guilt softened with time. He found work closer to home. On weekends, he spent hours in the garage, restoring small details on the car Dennis had never quite finished. It became his way of talking to his father. I stayed in the house. Despite what Vanessa had planned, I didn't downsize. I didn't disappear. I planted flowers in the yard, fixed the loose stair rail, and learned to ask for help without surrendering control. Independence, Dennis had written, doesn't mean being alone. It means choosing. Letters came occasionally, from investigators, from prosecutors, from two men who thanked me for stopping a woman who had nearly erased their lives. I kept those letters in a drawer, reminders that survival can ripple outward. One afternoon, Brian brought me Dennis's journal. There's one page we never finished, he said. It was the page about the retirement road trip. Blank lines waited beneath Dennis's handwriting. Brian looked at me. We should finish it. Not the way he planned, but our way. So we did. That spring, we took the Shelby onto the highway together. No rush. No destination. Carved in stone. Just miles unfolding ahead of us. Windows down. Sunlight warming the dash. At a rest stop overlooking a stretch of open road, Brian turned to me. I almost lost everything, he said. But Dad didn't let that happen. He trusted you'd find your way back, I answered. Brian nodded slowly. I think I finally did. I thought about everything Dennis left behind, proof, patience, protection. About how love sometimes works quietly, preparing for storms long before clouds appear. As we pulled back onto the road, the Shelby's engine purred beneath us, steady and sure. Not an ending. Just a continuation. Some lessons arrive too late. Some arrive just in time. This one arrived because someone loved deeply enough to plan ahead.